What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. In this video, we are going to be doing our don't draft list. So last week we did our my guys. Now this week we are talking about the guys that we are actively avoiding. Now, one caveat to this, for the most part, I'll indicate if they're just someone I'm completely out on. But for the most part, even players that I'm not actively targeting, there comes a point for everyone that they come into value. So if you're staring at one of these guys, they're like 2-3 rounds off of ADP, there's a chance that I'd still draft them. Like I said, if there's someone that I'm just not drafting at all, I'll let you know. But for the most part, all of these guys, if they fell like 2 rounds past their ADP, I'm still drafting them. So this is more of a don't draft at ADP list. Just wanted to make sure I get that out there. Other thing, as we go through these guys, just for the sake of time, I'm going to give you a few quick points as to why I'm not drafting them. But if you guys want a more in-depth analysis over each of these players that I'm talking about, I'll link in the description. We've done player breakdowns over all these guys we're talking about today, and you can see a bit more detailed reason as to why a little bit more bearish on these players. But without any further ado, let's get into our don't draft list, and we'll start with the quarterback position. We'll go into all the positions today. I will also link in the description timestamps for all these guys. If you don't have time to watch the whole video, that's fine. Just click in the description box and find each one of them. But we'll start with our first avoid, Josh Allen. Now, this is probably the most polarizing quarterback for fantasy this year. Josh Allen coming in to his third year, gets a upgrade to his receiver core with Stefon Diggs, still playing on a team with a good defense, decent offensive line as well. So a lot of people are hoping for Josh Allen to make a big leap into his third year at quarterback. But there's a few things that is causing me to not buy into that. For one, Josh Allen is not a very accurate quarterback in general, but especially deep down the field, which is where Stefon Diggs has been predominantly successful. Last year, playing on a low pass volume team, he got frustrated with the team, and he was playing with a quarterback that was very good at throwing it deep down the field. So him coming in, playing with Josh Allen, I could see a situation where he's pretty quickly frustrated in the new situation that he's in. And then the other main reason is Josh Allen saw a lot of his production from fantasy with the fact that he was receiving a lot of rushing touchdowns, but with the addition of Zach Moss, there's a high likelihood that that comes down. I mean, Michael Vick never had triple seasons where he had 8 touchdowns, and Josh Allen has had eight or more touchdowns in the past 2 seasons. That's most likely going to come down. Last year, the Bills were abysmal in the running game, other than Josh Allen near the goal line. And if that comes down to like 2 or 3, that's going to really impact his fantasy production, especially because most leagues play where rushing touchdowns are worth 2 more points than passing touchdowns. So with Zach Moss coming into the fray, I think that's going to help their run game, and Josh Allen won't be seeing as many rushing touchdowns this year. And then Josh Allen has yet to throw for 300 yards in a single game. So if you take away some of his rushing production, he doesn't actually take a step forward. We could be looking at a Mitchell Trubisky type situation where things just don't go well. And I mean, at this point, there's already a lot of talk in training camp that he's inconsistent. He's not looking as well improved as they were hoping for. I'm just staying away from Josh Allen. I know a lot of people are trying to find that next Lamar Jackson type, the guy that goes between rounds 9 and 11 that will jump into the upper echelons. A lot of people think it's Josh Allen. I think it's Cam Newton, and I'm avoiding Josh Allen at ADP. And honestly, he has a really good start to his season, but his schedule gets really tough over the course of the year. So even if you do draft Josh Allen and he starts out hot, make sure you have a backup option, because by the back end of the year, you're not going to want to be starting him. All right. Aaron Rodgers is our next one. Now, this one pains me as a Packers fan, but last year, Aaron Rodgers was arguably one of the most inconsistent week-to-week quarterbacks. He had a few good weeks that helped buoy his season and bring the overall points scored up, but he had multiple weeks with 0 or only 1 touchdown, and that's just not going to do it for you. You need a quarterback, especially if you're going to be drafting one in the single-digit rounds. You need someone that can at least average 2 touchdowns a week. And given the way that Matt LaFleur wants to run that offense, bringing in A.J. Dillon and Josiah DeGuara, all signs are pointing to them wanting to run the ball more. And while I do think Aaron Rodgers is still talented enough to put up big games, They didn't really do anything to improve his receiving options there in Green Bay, and unfortunately, that means I'm probably out on Aaron Rodgers. I think you'll be able to play him a few weeks in DFS, but not someone I want on a redraft league in fantasy. And then lastly, we've got Ben Roethlisberger. Now, last time we saw Ben Roethlisberger play a full season, he was a really good fantasy player. He threw the ball over 600 times, and obviously that was too much for his arm because next year he got injured pretty quickly on and wasn't able to finish, the vast majority of the season, getting injured there in week 2. So coming back from that injury that we've seen, a lot of baseball players have, typically takes over 12 months to fully recover. We don't get that full recovery because of the season starting, before he reaches that point. But even if he does recover, most likely he's not going to be throwing anywhere near that 600 attempts. Good bit older. We don't know at this point how much strength he has left in the arm. I mean, he's definitely getting up there in age as well. This could be his last season. And the last time we saw him, he was also very interception prone. So if his accuracy or his arm strength is impacted at all by this injury, we could see a pretty big regression. So while I do think the Steelers will at least be a good bit better than they were last year, because 80% effective Ben Roethlisberger is better than Kyle Rudolph or Devlin Hodges, I don't think that Ben Roethlisberger is going to be someone you're going to want on your fantasy team. I think he's going to be pretty inconsistent week to week. Okay, that's it for the quarterbacks. Let's jump to the running backs. And then this first one, I'm going to cast a wide net, and we're going to say all of the third round running backs, except for Jonathan Taylor, we're going to avoid this year. And I'll give a quick reason for each of them, and also just explain the reason why I'm fading the running backs in the third round is because that tier of receivers that goes in the third, fourth round is so good. I feel like you're wasting a pick taking a shot at these running backs that have high risk. You're better off grabbing 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds that are safer and higher upside plays, and then attacking wide receivers starting in the third round. Again, with the exception of Jonathan Taylor, and I still kind of like Melvin Gordon, although I'm beginning to grow a little colder on him as well. But with David Johnson hasn't finished the season in multiple years. Last time we saw him, he was highly ineffective on the ground, still being used as a receiver, but with Duke Johnson there as well, David Johnson could end up being usurped at some point in the season. If he gets hurt, they have a very capable backup. I just don't really trust anything in that Bill O'Brien system this year. Le'Veon Bell last year was highly ineffective, and the Jets' offense as a whole was pretty bad. That defense is looking to take a big step back as well with trading away Jamal Adams. And overall, not really excited about the Jets. They did improve that offensive line, but it's a completely different cast of starters all across the board. So that could take a while for them to begin to gel. And with them adding Frank Gore and the Michael Pirine, you already got Adam Gase talking about splitting the workload. I don't think Bell's going to see the opportunity share they did last year. So even if his efficiency goes up, I think his floor goes a bit lower. So I'm avoiding Bell. Chris Carson recovering from a pretty nasty hip injury, and them adding Carlos Hyde. I could see there being a really annoying situation where he's splitting carries with Carlos Hyde, and then when Rashad Penny comes back, it could be a pretty ugly 3-way backfield. And overall, it's probably not going to happen, but it'd be nice if the Seahawks would actually throw the ball a bit more. But I typically try to avoid running backs coming off of pretty serious injuries the first year back. So Carson is out for me. Gurley, already, hearing that he's walking with a limp in training camp, and we know that he has arthritic knee problems. A lot of his fantasy points over the past couple of years have been buoyed by touchdowns, but we don't really know how the Falcons plan to deploy him. Last year he saw a huge step back in his efficiency in the passing game, so if he's not able to continue to keep his points up with passing game work, he's definitely the best option on that team, and I could see a world where Gurley finishes as a really good running back, but I feel like there's a lot more risk there than you need to take when there's so many good receiver options around him. Leonard Fournette is the Josh Allen of running backs in terms of how polarizing in the fantasy community he is. Plenty of people think that he's a massive value in the third round, and some people wouldn't even touch him until the fifth round. I'm kind of in the middle on that. Fournette has been pretty productive from a fantasy standpoint over the course of his career. Now, coming in, the Jaguars are projected to be one of the worst teams in the NFL, lost a lot of people on defense, so they're probably going to have to air the ball out a bit, but I do think Fournette will still get decent volume, so he could end up being okay, but we know that the team was actively trying to trade him in the offseason. There's still a chance that they might even do that halfway through the season. They didn't pick up his fifth-year option, and I mean, last year he got 100 targets, most likely going to see that come back down a bit, so while I don't think he's going to be a massive bust in the third round, there's just a lot going against him that it's not worth the risk. And then James Conner, this is the one that I feel like I might be burned on. If he plays 16 games, I'll say right now that I'm wrong. If James Conner plays 16 games, I am wrong to not take him in the third round because he will end up outperforming his ADP if he can finish the season. The reason why I'm fading James Conner is I don't think he's going to finish the season. Yes, I know you can say, well, you can say that about anybody, but James Conner especially. James Conner and Will Fuller specifically are players that have shown year after year that they are not able to stay healthy. And with James Conner's injury history, multiple knee and ankle issues, also had the shoulder last year, it's concerning to see the amount of soft tissue injuries that he continues to have. And he hasn't had any hamstring issues yet, but I don't know. I just have a bad feeling about James Conner. Right now, Player Profiler has an injury risk predictor, and of all the running backs in the NFL, James Conner has the highest risk of re-injury. I like Anthony McFarland's. I think Benny Snell is going to get a decent amount of work if James Conner goes down. I just don't want to throw a third-round pick away when I would rather have a receiver like DJ Moore or Odell Beckham in the third round. If Conner hits, like I said, he's going to outperform his ADP. So if you need a third-round running back of all these guys, James Conner is probably the one that has the best chance of actually finishing as a running back one, but make sure you grab his backup. So that would be my caveat if you're going to take James Conner. But overall, I'm just fading all these guys because I like the receivers in that round too much. All right, next, let's talk about Devin Singletary. So Devin Singletary is, honestly, at this point, I think a lot of people are fading him, so maybe I am joining the masses on this one. But with Zach Moss getting a lot of praise in camp, we knew last year that Devin Singletary really didn't get any goal line work, even when Frank Gore wasn't playing. Josh Allen was taking all of that work. So they don't trust him in the goal line for whatever reason. I'm not really sure why. He wasn't bad in college on the goal line, but they just don't trust him in that situation. Josh Allen does not check down to the running back, and Devin Singletary, got a good bit of his work in the passing game last year. But the thing that helps buoy fantasy production for guys like Christian McCaffrey is the fact that they're constantly getting checked down to. So we know that's not what Josh Allen likes to do. He likes to go deep whenever he's checking down. So Devin Singletary is, has a lower floor in the passing game. And if Zach Moss is going to end up taking 50% of the work, Zach Moss is going to be a lot more effective than Frank Gore was with that. So I think we're in a situation where Devin Singletary will see less volume than he did last year. So even if he's as efficient as he was, with less volume, he's going to end up disappointing you at his current cost in the fifth round. Another fifth round running back that we are fading hardcore is Raheem Mostert. Now, Raheem Mostert had a really good run last year to finish out the fantasy season and then had that killer game to destroy my Packers in the playoffs. But something to note, Tevin Coleman actually started that game and was hurt. That's why Raheem Mostert got the majority of the work. But Kyle Shanahan is not someone that plays favorites with running backs. He's very much like Bill Belichick used to be and still kind of is in terms of playing the best running back against the situation. So you drafting Raheem Mostert in the fifth round is a great way of causing a reason for you to pull your hair out a few weeks into the season, because Raheem Mostert could come out week one and get 3 carries for 10 yards and not see the field the rest of the day, and you won't know what to do. Because if you draft Raheem Mostert in the fifth round, you can't drop him. No one's going to trade you for him. This is a guy that could see his value drop immediately, and that's not a player that you want to take in the fifth round, especially with Tevin Coleman coming back. Last year he had that high ankle sprain that was keeping him really ineffective, and then Jerick McKinnon is getting a lot of praise in camp right now, so Raheem Mostert could not have much work in the passing game, And if he's not actually getting a massive amount of carries on the ground, it's going to be really inconsistent week to week, and that's not something you want to deal with in a redraft league. So Raheem Mostert is one of those guys I'm probably not drafting, period, unless he fell to like the 10th round, which I know he won't. Everyone else here, like I said, Devin Singletary too. I'd probably avoid Singletary and Mostert regardless. Any of the 3rd round running backs, if they fell to like the 5th round, I'd take them, but for what it's worth. And then last set of guys here, we're casting a lot of nets with the running backs. I call this the value, in quotes, tier. A lot of zero running back analysts are saying you can take a bunch of receivers and a tight end or a quarterback early because you can get guys like Phillip Lindsay or Marlon Mack or Kerryon Johnson in the 7th to 9th round. And that's great because they're starters. Well, for one, Lindsay isn't a starter. I do believe that they brought Melvin Gordon into Denver to actually be the main running back there. Marlon Mack, he had an interview, I think it was about 2 days ago at this point, where you could just read it on his face that he knew that Jonathan Taylor was taking his job and he could do nothing about it. Kerryon Johnson report came out yesterday that he basically is now living with a knee brace because of the constant knee issues that he's having. DeAndre Swift is looking good in camp, although he did have a leg injury the other day. No word on the severity of it, but none of these guys are players that you're drafting with upside. All of them have significant downside risk in the fact that their jobs could just be have the rug completely pulled out from under them. And I feel like it's a wasted pick. Once you get to the 7th to 9th round, you should be shooting for upside because you should have already filled out your floor plays and your players that are going to be the stalwarts of your roster in the first 6 rounds. Once you get to the 7th round, if you're drafting a guy that doesn't have significant upside, what's the point? So these are guys that I'm pretty much avoiding, period. Unless you're like, if you grab Jonathan Taylor and you can get Marlon Mack in the 9th round, I understand it because Marlon Mack will probably have like 2 or 3 weeks before Jonathan Taylor starts seeing the majority of the carries. But I don't get it with these guys, and they're players that I'm pretty much actively avoiding. I'd rather take upside shots at wide receiver in these rounds. All right, speaking of wide receiver, let's get into our don't draft wide receivers now. This first one, I admit I'm a little afraid of and could burn me, so take this one with a grain of salt, but we'll start with Cooper Kupp. Now, Cooper Kupp finished really well last year in terms of fantasy points, but over the back half of the season saw a pretty massive drop in his snap percentage. He saw a drop in his fantasy points per game. He was, top 5 receiver through the first half of the year and then dropped to about wide receiver 20 over the back half of the year. And part of that reason was as the team shifted their philosophy and played with more 2 tight end sets, Cooper Kupp was moved out of the slot. And Cooper Kupp's splits in versus out of the slot show that he is not nearly as good of a receiver when he has to play outside. Now, with Brandon Cooks gone, they do add Van Jefferson. They still have Josh Reynolds there. But with the way that the Rams offense was improved by switching to 12 personnel, it seems a bit ambitious to say that, Sean McVay for sure is going to go back to playing more 3 wide receiver sets every week because that's what he's always done. Well, they also give him credit for saying, he just exploited the matchups because the weeks that he saw, in the back half of the season, they were going to do more 12 personnel because those teams weren't good against tight ends. Maybe it just had the fact to do with he had a terrible offensive line and he needed the help. So it made more sense for Jared Goff to have an extra tight end out there to create some more space for him so he could actually throw the ball. And maybe because they didn't do anything to improve their offensive line, this becomes the new normal. And if Cooper Kupp is not lining up in the slot, he's not going to be the same fantasy producer that he was. Now, you can get him pretty cheap because he's not like he's going in the 2nd round, but still, there's so many other receivers in the 4th round that I'd rather have than Cooper Kupp because I just don't see the upside there. I'd rather have A.J. Brown. I'd rather have Calvin Ridley, Adam Thielen, Juju Smith-Schuster, DJ Moore. Any of those guys I'd rather have than Cooper Kupp. So while Cooper Kupp is probably going to finish around his ADP, I think there's a lot better shot of you hitting someone that massively outproduces their ADP than Cooper Kupp in the 4th round. So that's why I'm fading him. All right, next on our list is Stefon Diggs. Now, this goes back to our original standpoint of if he falls like 2 or 3 rounds, I'll still take a shot on him because I think he's going to continue doing what he's always done, which is annoy redraft owners. Stefon Diggs is like the perfect best ball DFS play where he's going to end up finishing with like 3 games on the year where he scores 60% of his fantasy points combined in those 3 games. That's pretty much been his MO his entire career for fantasy. He looks really good when you just look at the end of the year and say, oh, he finished as, the wide receiver 10 or the wide receiver 15. But he has so many games in between where he wasn't even startable because he's, putting up 6 to 8 fantasy points. And then he has this 40-point game that makes his stat sheet look great at the end of the year. But week over week has been very inconsistent. Stefon Diggs also is now playing as the number 1 receiver, whereas before he had Adam Thielen to take away some of the top cornerback help, whereas now that Stefon Diggs is going to have to be the main guy, that could also end up impacting him. We saw that Stefon Diggs played much better when Adam Thielen was healthy. When Adam Thielen was out of the rotation due to injury, his production went down as well. So overall, I'm just fading the Bills in general, and Stefon Diggs falls straight into that because he's going right around the 6th round where I'd rather have guys like Michael Gallup. So take a shot on AJ Green, assuming he's back on the practice field this week. If not, I'm going to start fading AJ Green. I'd be okay with taking a guy like Dak Prescott in that round. So there's just other guys I like better than Stefon Diggs. If he falls to the 8th round, it's worth the risk because his upside is there. But he's just one of those really frustrating players that you never know when you can trust starting him, and I just don't like those guys on my roster. Okay. Next up, we're looking at Will Fuller, a guy we already foreshadowed when we were talking about James Conner. For the same reasons, guy just cannot stay healthy for his life. Now, again, same caveat, if Will Fuller finishes 16 games, he's probably going to end up outproducing his ADP. But his ADP has been rising in the past couple weeks. At this point, he's a 6th, 7th round receiver, and I'm not going to pay that price tag for him. If I could get him in the 9th round, I'll do it, just because the upside is most certainly there. But if I had to bet right now whether or not Will Fuller would finish the season, there's no way I'm going to take that bet. Last year, he was only off the injury report for 2 weeks in the entire season, and over half of his fantasy points came in a single game. He's also been a receiver that's never really been that great in terms of scoring touchdowns. And now that DeAndre Hopkins is gone, we'll actually get to see what happens when he has to face the number 1 cornerback. I mean, he definitely is arguably the Texans' biggest threat at receiver, but again, having to face the number 1 cornerback on the team, Brandon Cooks coming into town could steal a lot of volume. And without DeAndre Hopkins there, because DeAndre Hopkins faced some of the most double coverage of any receiver last year and has been the case for a while now. So with that attention no longer having to go to DeAndre Hopkins, I don't know that we'll see the same efficiency from Will Fuller. So I'm out with the injury risk and the chance that he's just not as good as we thought he was because of DeAndre Hopkins stealing so much of the attention of the defense. It's just not worth the risk to me, but I understand why people are going after him. So again, he's one of those guys that I would buy if the price was a few rounds cheaper. And then lastly, we're looking at DEEBO Samuel. And this one hurts a bit because I really like DEEBO Samuel as a talent. I like him as a fantasy player, but that foot injury that he sustained in the offseason, right now we still don't even know if he's going to be ready for week 1. And if he is, he's probably not going to be fully effective. There's still a chance that they put him on the PUP list and he's out for 6 weeks. And even if they don't put him there, he'll probably be out for the first 2 to 4 weeks. But these type of injuries, especially a foot injury, can really linger for a good portion of the season. So DEEBO Samuel is someone I'm not going to walk away in my draft. It does not mean I will not have DEEBO Samuel on my team at some point in the year. He's someone that you can very easily go after in trades after he comes out and is either injured and doesn't play for the first couple weeks or is ineffective for the first couple weeks. That's the kind of guy that you can trade for at a lot cheaper of a price after the fact. And he doesn't have to sit on your bench because even if he went in like the 10th, 11th round, he's going to be sitting on your bench for the first half of the year, just kind of rotting away and wasting a roster spot. If you have a league that does any trades at all, DEEBO Samuel is a fade in the draft for me and someone that I'm going to try to acquire right about midway through the season, because I do think he'll finish that second half of the season much more effective than he does the first half. So hopefully I explained that well. Let's jump to the tight ends. I know we're going a little long here. We only got 3 tight ends that we want to talk about, but the first one is Darren Waller. Now, Darren Waller had very much of a breakout season last year, and it really helped a lot of teams win their leagues. The problem with Darren Waller this year is you're no longer getting that discount that you got last year. The Raiders added a ton of receiving options in Henry Ruggs, in Bryan Edwards, in Lynn Bowden. They acquired Jason Witten, who saw 80 targets last year. They still have Tyrell Williams. They still have Hunter Renfrow. They still have Foster Moreau. They added receiving weapons in the backfield with Lynn Bowden, and they just signed Theo Riddick. So this offense is very crowded. And last year we saw Darren Waller was significantly better in games where he saw a lot more targets. But in those games, that was weeks where Tyrell Williams was hurt, where Foster Moreau was hurt, where Hunter Renfrow was hurt. Once Hunter Renfrow came back, Darren Waller saw a massive reduction in his target share in those games. Now, last year finishing with only 3 touchdowns, he's likely to do better in the touchdown department, but if he sees, 20-25% target reduction, then he's not going to give you value at ADP where you're having to draft him in the 5th or 6th round. Darren Waller is one of those guys, if everyone fades him, I'll take him in the 8th or 9th round easily, because I think he has the talent to produce pretty consistently, but I don't think he's going to get the volume that he did last year, and that was the main reason why he was so productive last year, because he was getting like 8 to 10 targets a week in the games that he was finishing with 20 fantasy points. So that's my take on Darren Waller. Next is Rob Gronkowski. This one's pretty easy for me right now because his ADP finally skyrocketed. We were thinking it was going to happen. It took a while, but it finally jumped into like, he's going right now between like the 5th and the 6th round. There's no way I'm going to take Rob Gronkowski in the 5th or 6th round around a lot of the other guys that are going there. Because for one, they're already hyping up OJ Howard a bit. Now I know they did that last year, and OJ Howard has burned so many people that it doesn't mean that I'm promoting OJ Howard in this take, but Rob Gronkowski has already been slammed for his lack of conditioning. He took a year off from football. Last time we saw him, he was, nowhere near the same effectiveness as he had been in years past. He's on the wrong side of 30, playing in an offense that already has a lot of targets spoken for with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Like I said, OJ Howard is there, and Cameron Brate has also been a red zone threat for the Buccaneers for the last couple years. So I just don't think Rob Gronkowski is going to come anywhere near his ADP. He'll probably have a few good weeks, but overall, I don't think there's any chance of him finishing as a consistent tight end 1 week over week. So there's no way I'm paying the ADP price on him. If he fell to like the 10th round, it's worth a shot, but no way I'm paying a middle round, 5 or 6 or even 7 round price for Rob Gronkowski. All right. Last guy we want to talk about today is Jared Cook. Now, last year, Jared Cook was highly efficient with the low volume of targets that he was receiving, and to the point that it is absurd to assume that he'll sustain that same level of production. This is one, go back and watch the video that I did on Jared Cook for a better explanation of this, but there's absolutely no way I'm banking on Jared Cook scoring the same amount of touchdowns, having the same amount of yards per reception as he did in 2019. With Alvin Kamara coming back fully healthy, adding Emmanuel Sanders to this roster, and adding Adam Troutman, I think that Jared Cook is going to see, even if he saw the same target share, his production is going to go down massively. His points were buoyed by touchdowns tremendously last year, and I just don't see a world where he finishes anywhere near where he went last year. So at this point, anywhere you draft him is probably overdrafting him. I would rather take 2 or 3 shots at high upside guys like Jonnu Smith, TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant, Mike Gesicki, guys that are going around him that I feel have a much better shot at producing in the top 10 at the position than Jared Cook does. So anyway, that is it, guys. Thank you for joining us here. And again, if you missed any of this, check the description box and you can go and see each of the individual players that we talked about. Also, we'll link to our player breakdown for each of these guys if you want a bit more in-depth analysis as to why we landed where we did in terms of our analysis on these guys. But that is it. Thank you guys for watching. Hit that subscribe button for more content like this, and good luck in your drafts. We'll see you guys in the next video.